Victoria had always been an afterthought in her family. Her younger sister, Mary, was the golden child, the one who received all the attention, admiration, and unwavering support from their parents. No matter what Victoria achieved, it was always overshadowed by Mary's successes, leaving her feeling like an outsider in her own home. Even as she grew older, this dynamic never changed. While she longed for her parents' approval and care, she only received neglect and indifference in return. Despite this, Victoria still tried to fulfill her role as a devoted daughter. When her parents took early retirement 3 years ago, they struggled to maintain their lifestyle. Without hesitation, she stepped in to help, sending them $5,000 every month to cover their mortgage and expenses. She did so not because they asked, but because she believed that family should support each other in difficult times. Even after James, her beloved husband, died in a tragic car accident 6 months ago, she continued these payments. Though she was now a widow raising 2-year-old twins alone, she never stopped putting her family's needs before her own. James had been the one person who truly saw her. He understood the pain of family disappointment, having been estranged from his own father. Together, they had promised to create a family built on love, respect, and unwavering support. But his sudden death had left Victoria not only heartbroken but also struggling to balance grief, financial burdens, and the responsibility of raising Ethan and Emily alone. Even in her darkest moments, she continued to send money to her parents, wanting to be better than they had ever been to her. But everything changed on Christmas Eve. That night, Victoria was rushed to the hospital with excruciating abdominal pain. Doctors discovered internal bleeding, a severe complication likely brought on by the stress of losing her husband and single-handedly managing everything. She needed emergency surgery, but there was one problem: she had no one to care for Ethan and Emily. Desperate, she called her parents, pleading with them to watch their only grandchildren for just one night while she underwent the procedure. She barely had time to explain before her mother snapped, her voice sharp with irritation. "Don't you dare ask us to cancel our plans again. We've had these Elton John tickets for months." Victoria sat there in stunned silence, clutching her phone as pain radiated through her body. She was alone in a hospital room, fighting for her life, while her 2 toddlers played quietly in the corner. The only people she had left in the world, the ones she had supported without question, had just told her, in no uncertain terms, that they would rather go to a concert than care for their own daughter and grandchildren in a life-or-death situation. At that moment, something inside her broke. She had spent her entire life seeking their approval, proving her worth, and sacrificing her own well-being for their comfort. But now, she saw the truth: they had never truly cared about her. And for the first time, she decided, enough was enough. Lying in the hospital bed, Victoria felt an unbearable mix of pain, not just from the excruciating abdominal agony, but from the sheer betrayal of her own parents. She had spent her entire life trying to be a good daughter, supporting them financially while raising her children alone. And now, when she needed them most, they had dismissed her as a burden. Their choice was clear: Elton John tickets mattered more than their daughter's life. Her hands trembled as she put the phone down, blinking back tears. Her 2-year-old twins, Ethan and Emily, were playing quietly in the corner, blissfully unaware of the situation. They had already lost their father. And now, if this surgery didn't go well, they might lose their mother too. The thought was unbearable, suffocating. A gentle squeeze on her shoulder brought her back to reality. Valerie, the kind nurse attending to her, had witnessed the entire heartbreaking exchange. There was sympathy in her eyes, but more than that, there was determination. "My friend Olivia is a professional nanny," Valerie said softly. "She specializes in working with children who've gone through trauma. Let me call her for you." At first, Victoria hesitated. She had never relied on strangers before. Her entire life had been spent trying to earn her parents' love, believing that family was supposed to be there for each other. But what was family, really, if they treated her like this? At this moment, she realized she was clinging to a toxic bond that had only brought her pain. "Yes, please call her," Victoria whispered. With those words, she made the first step toward cutting ties with the people who had raised her but never truly loved her. As she lay in the hospital bed, waiting for Olivia to arrive, memories of her childhood flooded her mind. She remembered the times when Mary had been celebrated while she had been overlooked. She recalled the disappointment of her college graduation, when her parents barely acknowledged her achievement because Mary had landed a small role in a local commercial. She thought about her wedding day, when instead of celebrating, they had complained about the venue being too far from their home. And most painfully, she remembered how, after Ethan and Emily were born, they had visited only once, claiming that newborns were too fussy for their liking. How had she not seen it before? She had spent years convincing herself that if she just worked harder, did more, or proved herself worthy, they would finally give her the love and support she had craved her entire life. But tonight had made it crystal clear. Their love had always been conditional, and their priorities had never included her. The nurse returned with an update. "Olivia is on her way," she reassured her. "She'll be here in less than an hour." Relief flooded Victoria's body. For the first time, she was placing her trust in people who genuinely cared about her, rather than those who only cared about what she could provide. Before being prepped for surgery, she made one final decision. "Can you bring me my phone one last time?" she asked Valerie. With shaking hands, she sent 2 messages. The first was to her bank. She canceled all future automatic transfers to her parents. The second was to her parents themselves. "I will no longer be providing financial support. My children and I deserve better than being your afterthoughts. Don't contact me again." As they wheeled her toward the operating room, a strange sensation washed over her. Through the pain and fear, she felt something unexpected: freedom. As Victoria was wheeled into the operating room, a strange sense of relief settled over her, even through the haze of pain. For the first time in her life, she had finally put herself and her children first. The weight of obligation she had carried for years, the endless effort to please parents who only took from her, was beginning to lift. The surgery was successful, but the recovery was more grueling than she had anticipated. She spent 5 days in the hospital, drifting in and out of consciousness, her body weak from the ordeal. But what truly kept her grounded was knowing that her twins were safe, not with people who saw them as burdens, but with someone who actually cared. True to her reputation, Olivia had been a godsend. She not only stayed with Ethan and Emily at the hospital during the day, but also took them to Victoria's apartment at night, making sure they were well cared for. For the first time since James's death, Victoria felt like she wasn't struggling alone. One evening, as she regained some strength, she picked up her phone and saw 27 missed calls. Her parents. Mary. Text messages flooded her screen, each one more desperate than the last. At first, there had been confusion. Then anger. Then, predictably, panic. Her parents had not once asked how her surgery had gone or if she was okay. Instead, their messages revolved around one thing: money. Her father's last text stood out the most. "You can't just cut us off like this. We planned a cruise next month, and the tickets are non-refundable." Victoria let out a dry, humorless laugh. They had just learned she might not have survived surgery, and yet, their greatest concern was their vacation. Mary's messages, however, were different. "Mom and Dad just told me you were having some minor procedure. What's going on? Why are they freaking out about money? Victoria paused. It dawned on her that her parents had lied to Mary about the severity of her condition. They had downplayed her emergency surgery and conveniently omitted the part where they had refused to watch her children because of a concert. She decided Mary deserved to know the truth. Still groggy from medication, Victoria typed out the full story. Every detail. How she had begged for help, how their parents had dismissed her, and how she had finally made the decision to cut financial ties for good. Mary's response came almost immediately. "Oh my God, Victoria. I had no idea. They told me you were just being dramatic about a routine checkup. I would have watched the twins if I had known. I'm so sorry." Victoria sighed. She believed her. Mary wasn't cruel. She had just been raised in an environment where she was always prioritized and had never questioned it. Still, trust wasn't something Victoria could easily give anymore. Not yet. By the time she was discharged, she had already made several critical decisions. 1. She hired Olivia part-time to help with the twins while she recovered. 2. She contacted a lawyer to draft a will, ensuring that if anything happened to her, her children would never end up in the hands of her parents. 3. She blocked her parents' numbers, allowing only limited contact with Mary as she assessed whether her sister was sincere. The financial implications of her decision were significant. The $2,500 she had been sending every month accounted for nearly a third of her income. Without that burden, she could finally afford proper child care and even start rebuilding the emergency fund that had been drained after James's death. That night, as she lay in her own bed for the first time in days, listening to the soft breathing of her twins in the next room, she felt something new. There was guilt, the ingrained feeling that she was somehow wrong for prioritizing herself and her children. There was fear, the uncertainty of managing recovery while raising 2 toddlers alone. But most of all, there was something she had never truly felt before: self-respect. Her phone pinged with another text from Mary. "I just had a huge fight with Mom and Dad about how they treated you. I'm staying at a hotel tonight. Can we talk tomorrow?" Victoria stared at the message, feeling a flicker of something unfamiliar. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't entirely alone after all. Victoria knew that cutting financial ties with her parents would have consequences, but she hadn't expected the sheer desperation that followed. The morning after she was discharged from the hospital, she woke up to a knock at the door, one she had been half expecting. Through the peephole, she saw them. Her parents. Her mother stood clutching her designer purse nervously, while her father had his arms crossed, his usual impatience written all over his face. They looked frustrated, but not worried, certainly not the way parents should look after their daughter had undergone emergency surgery. Victoria took a deep breath before cracking the door open, just enough to speak. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice steadier than she had expected. Her mother's tone was saccharine, dripping with artificial concern. "Victoria, darling, we've been so worried," she cooed. "You haven't answered our calls. We needed to make sure you and the twins were all right." Victoria didn't flinch. "We're fine." She kept her tone flat. "Now, if that's all." "It's not all," her father interrupted, pushing slightly against the door. Victoria stiffened. Of course, this wasn't about her well-being. "We need to discuss this ridiculous financial situation," he continued. "The bank called about our mortgage payment, and we had to dip into our cruise savings to cover it." Victoria blinked. The audacity was breathtaking. "No, how was your surgery?" "No, are the twins okay?" "Just demands for money." She exhaled slowly, grounding herself before responding. I told you I was cutting financial ties, she said. I meant it. Her mother's voice pitched higher, now laced with desperation. But sweetie, we've come to depend on that money. Your father and I adjusted our lifestyle based on your commitment to help us. Victoria almost laughed. Commitment? She had spent years sending them money out of guilt, obligation, and love, not because of any formal agreement. And yet, in their minds, her financial support had become something they were entitled to. She shook her head. I've been sending you money while raising 2 toddlers alone, while grieving my husband, while trying to survive. Meanwhile, you couldn't even be bothered to help with your own grandchildren during my emergency surgery. Her father's face darkened. That's not fair, Victoria, he snapped. We had plans. Plans that were more important than my children's safety? More important than my life? Her voice rose. Did you even ask the doctors if I would survive? Their silence spoke volumes. Her mother tried a new tactic, whispering dramatically, we made one mistake. Are you really going to punish us like this? Victoria's response was calm, almost detached. This isn't punishment, Mom. This is a consequence. For the first time, she saw them clearly. They had never been the loving, supportive parents she had longed for. They were self-serving, transactional, and unwilling to take responsibility for their actions. Just then, Emily toddled into view, clutching her stuffed giraffe. Her mother's face lit up with sudden warmth. There's my precious grandbaby, she crooned, bending down. Grandma brought presents. But Emily stepped back, uncertain, glancing up at Victoria instead. That was all she needed to see. I think you should leave. Her father opened his mouth to argue, but Victoria cut him off. When I'm ready to talk, if I'm ever ready, I'll reach out. But the money? She shook her head. That's no longer your concern. And with that, she closed the door. Underscore 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 underscore. They didn't give up easily. The next morning, they returned, this time with reinforcements. Her Aunt Patty stood outside her door, the self-proclaimed family peacemaker. Victoria, honey, let's be reasonable, Aunt Patty pleaded. Your parents are struggling without your help. Victoria crossed her arms. They managed their finances just fine before I started helping them, she replied. They chose early retirement knowing their savings weren't enough. Her mother's voice broke in from the hallway. We made those decisions because you promised to help us. Now we might lose the house. The manipulation was so transparent now. When had she ever promised lifelong financial support? Victoria sighed. I just had major surgery. I'm raising 2 toddlers. This conversation is over. And she walked away, ignoring their continued knocking and pleading. Later that day, she received an email, one sent to the entire extended family. Her father had written a dramatic message, portraying Victoria as an ungrateful daughter who had abandoned her parents in their time of need. But they hadn't expected the backlash. Her cousin Michael was the first to reply, Uncle Robert, didn't you just buy a new boat last month? And Aunt Diana, wasn't that a new diamond bracelet you showed off at Thanksgiving? Other relatives chimed in, asking for the full story. Even Aunt Patty called later, her voice lower. I had no idea about your surgery, she admitted. They told me you were just being dramatic. I'm so sorry. Victoria felt an unexpected surge of strength. She didn't need their approval anymore. For the first time in her life, she was free. Victoria had expected her parents to struggle without her financial support, but she hadn't anticipated just how quickly their carefully maintained facade would crumble. Only a few weeks had passed since she cut them off, and already, they were desperate. Mary kept her updated, though Victoria hadn't asked her to. They're panicking, Mary said over the phone one evening. Mom is in full meltdown mode. Dad is furious. They're telling everyone you abandoned them. Victoria sighed, unsurprised. They'd been living beyond their means for years, she said. It was only a matter of time before reality caught up with them. Mary hesitated. There's more, she admitted. I went over to their house to talk, and Victoria, they took out a second mortgage last year. To buy the boat. Victoria nearly dropped her phone. Wait, what? Mary sighed. They borrowed against the house assuming you'd always cover the primary mortgage. They thought your payments were guaranteed. Victoria felt her stomach turn. It was one thing to rely on her help, but to gamble with their home based on the assumption that she'd fund their lifestyle indefinitely? They'd been lying to everyone, Mary continued, her voice tight with frustration. They told the whole family they were struggling with medical bills and inflation, but really, they were just overspending. If they sold the boat and the timeshare, they'd be fine. Victoria let out a humorless laugh. Of course, they won't do that. They'd rather beg than admit they'd been reckless. And sure enough, the begging began. The next morning, her phone was flooded with texts from her parents, each one more desperate than the last. Her mother's message was particularly revealing. We never thought you'd actually cut us off. We assumed you were just angry and would send money again after a week or two. Victoria stared at the words, feeling a familiar wave of resentment. They had never respected her boundaries. They had never believed she had the strength to walk away. But she did. Underscore 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 underscore. Their situation deteriorated rapidly. Within a month, the bank issued a foreclosure notice on their home. Mary called Victoria the moment she found out, her voice a mix of concern and exasperation. They're in full panic mode, she said. The bank gave them 60 days to catch up on payments or they'll lose the house. Victoria shifted Emily on her knee, listening carefully. What about their retirement funds? Mostly gone, Mary sighed. Dad invested a chunk of it into some scheme his golf buddy recommended. They lost almost everything. Victoria shook her head. It was infuriating, but not surprising. I'm not saying you should help them, Mary added quickly. I just thought you should know. Victoria nodded. She appreciated Mary's honesty, but her answer remained the same. She wasn't going to rescue them. Underscore 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 underscore. Her parents, however, were still convinced she would. 2 weeks later, they showed up at her apartment again, this time with a detailed spreadsheet of their debts. Her father placed it on the table, his usual competence now replaced by something closer to desperation. "We need $144,000 to catch up on the mortgage and avoid foreclosure," he said. Victoria invited them in, not out of obligation, but out of curiosity. She gestured to the papers. "What about selling the boat?" Her father grimaced. "We'd take a loss." "And the timeshare?" Her mother fidgeted. "We've tried, but the market is bad." "Then you need to downsize," Victoria said simply. "You can't afford this lifestyle." Her father's tone hardened. "We could, if you helped." Victoria met his gaze, unflinching. "What exactly have you done for me?" Her mother opened her mouth to speak, but Victoria raised a hand. "No, really." "What have you done? When I graduated college with honors, you barely acknowledged it. When I got married, you complained about the venue. When I was in the hospital, you refused to help me because of a concert." Her father's jaw tightened. "That's not fair. Isn't it?" Victoria challenged. "Because from where I'm standing, the only time you care about me is when you need something." Just then, Ethan toddled into the room, holding his favorite toy truck. Her mother instantly softened, her voice turning sugary. "There's my precious grandbaby." Victoria felt a protective fury rise in her chest. No, her voice was firm. "You don't get to act like doting grandparents when you only show up when you want money." Her mother's face crumpled. Whether from genuine emotion or calculated manipulation, Victoria couldn't tell anymore. Her mother's voice dropped to a whisper. "Without your help, we'll lose everything." Victoria stood tall. "I lost my husband," she said, her voice steady. "My children lost their father. We survived. You'll survive too." And with that, she walked them to the door, closing it on their pleas once and for all. Victoria had spent years trapped in the cycle of obligation, believing that her worth was tied to how much she could give. But now, with the weight of her parents' demands finally lifted, she was discovering what it meant to live for herself and her children. Her parents' financial downfall had been swift. Within 3 months, they were forced to sell their house to avoid foreclosure. Mary kept her informed but never pressured her to intervene. "They found a condo," Mary told her one day. "It's small, but it's enough for them. Dad had to sell the boat at a loss, and they finally got rid of the timeshare." Victoria listened quietly. She felt no satisfaction in their struggles, only relief that she had stepped away before they could drag her down with them. But her life, in contrast, was flourishing. With the $2,500 she had once sent her parents, she could now afford proper childcare. Olivia, the nanny who had saved her during her hospital stay, became a part of their daily lives. 3 days a week, she helped care for Ethan and Emily, allowing Victoria to focus on work without guilt. Her graphic design business was thriving, but something unexpected had also emerged, a new passion project. During her grief, she had created an online memorial for James, a space where friends and family could share memories, photos, and messages of love. After mentioning it in her widow's support group, several people asked her to design similar memorial websites for their loved ones. Word spread quickly, and soon, what started as a personal tribute became a growing side business. For the first time in years, she wasn't just surviving, she was building something meaningful. She had also taken a bold step for her family's future. With the help of Diana, A real estate agent she had met in her support group, Victoria sold her two-small apartment and moved into a cozy 3-bedroom house in a quiet, family-friendly neighborhood. The mortgage was lower than her apartment rent had been, and for the first time, her twins had a backyard to play in. Even Mary was becoming someone new. She had started visiting regularly, spending weekends with the twins, bringing them small gifts, and offering to help wherever she could. One evening, as they watched Ethan and Emily play, Mary turned to Victoria and said, "I see things differently now. I always thought you were the one pulling away from the family, but now I know Mom and Dad were pushing you out." Victoria nodded. She wasn't ready to fully trust Mary yet, but she appreciated her effort. Most importantly, she had built a genuine support network, one not based on obligation, but on mutual care. Neighbors brought casseroles when she moved in. Friends from the support group organized playdates. Valerie from the hospital even stopped by with her children. She had lost her husband and her parents, but somehow, she felt less alone than ever before. 6 months had passed since Victoria's surgery, and life had finally started to feel stable. Her children were happy, her work was fulfilling, and for the first time in years, she felt at peace. Then, one afternoon, an unexpected letter arrived. She almost threw it away unopened. The handwriting on the envelope was unmistakable. Her mother. Curiosity won out. With cautious fingers, she unfolded the paper and began to read. "I've had time to reflect on my behavior," the letter began. "Watching you build a life without our help has forced me to confront some painful truths about myself as a mother." Victoria's grip tightened on the paper. She had never expected an apology. Her mother went on to admit that she had resented Victoria's independence, that she had wanted Victoria to need her in a way that fit her own terms, not in the ways Victoria actually did. "When you asked us to watch the twins during your surgery, you were reaching out. And we failed you completely. I am deeply sorry." Victoria's chest tightened. The letter contained no requests for money, no manipulations, no guilt-tripping. Just an acknowledgement of the truth. She showed it to Mary later that evening. Mary sighed, crossing her arms. "They'd been talking about writing to you for weeks," she admitted. "Dad was against it at first, but I think he's starting to see things differently too." Victoria looked up sharply. "Dad?" Mary hesitated. "He had a health scare last month. High blood pressure, chest pains. It scared him." Despite herself, Victoria felt a flicker of concern. "He's on medication now, actually following doctor's orders for once," Mary added. "I think facing his own mortality humbled him a bit." Victoria remained silent, unsure of how to process this information. She wasn't ready to forgive them, not yet. Maybe not ever. That night, after putting the twins to bed, she pulled out an old photo album from the back of her closet. It had been years since she had looked at these pictures. Behind the smiling faces, she saw something she had been blind to before: patterns of neglect, of selfishness, of love that only existed when it was convenient. But this letter? This was different. Her parents had spent their entire lives justifying their choices, manipulating, deflecting blame. But now, for the first time, they had taken responsibility. And that was worth something. Victoria wasn't sure where this would lead. She wasn't going to let them walk back into her life as if nothing had happened. But maybe, just maybe, this was a start. A year had passed since Victoria's surgery, and she had transformed into a woman who knew her worth. No longer desperate for her parents' approval, no longer weighed down by guilt, she had rebuilt her life from the ground up. Then, one afternoon, she agreed to something she never thought she would: a meeting with her parents. It was a neutral location, a quiet cafe near her new home. She arrived early, sipping her tea, preparing herself. When they walked in, she barely recognized them. Her father, once so confident and authoritative, seemed smaller, his usual arrogance replaced by a quiet humility. Her mother, always draped in designer clothes, now wore simple, practical attire. For a long moment, they sat in awkward silence. Then, to her shock, her father spoke first. "I've been a terrible father," he admitted, his voice breaking. "And an even worse grandfather." Victoria said nothing, waiting. Her mother reached across the table, hesitating before speaking. "We've been in therapy," she said softly. "It was Mary's idea. We resisted at first, but it's changed us." Victoria's grip tightened on her cup. She had spent her entire life waiting for them to change. Now, they claimed they finally had, but she knew better than to believe words alone. Instead of offering immediate forgiveness, she told them about her life. She shared pictures of Ethan and Emily, told them about her new home, her growing business, and the community she had built. And for the first time in their relationship, they listened. As they stood to leave, her father hesitated. "Would it be possible someday to know our grandchildren?" he asked, his voice uncertain. Victoria took a slow breath, considering her answer. "That depends on your actions, not your words," she said firmly. "If you're genuinely committed to change, we can start with short, supervised visits. But understand this: my children will only have relationships with people who respect their mother." Her father nodded, accepting her terms without argument. As she walked away, she felt something she had never felt with them before: a sense of control over her own boundaries. Maybe they had changed. Maybe they hadn't. Either way, she had. She was no longer the daughter begging for love, she was the mother fiercely protecting her own.